There's a reason old-school soldiers, scouts, and wilderness instructors keep going back to the navigation methods born during the Second World War. Those men were dropped into forests, deserts and mountain ranges without GPS, satellite imagery or fancy navigation apps. When the terrain turned chaotic, or equipment froze, jammed or vanished in the mud, they had to rely on fieldcraft so reliable it bordered on instinct. One of the most impressive survival tools to come out of that era wasn't a piece of metal or a lensatic compass. It was a technique, a simple trick for finding direction with nothing more than your senses and a bit of environmental reading. If you've ever wondered how soldiers marched at night, crossed unknown ridgelines, or regrouped after an ambush with zero equipment, this is the trick that kept them oriented and alive. And before we dive into it, think about this. Every year, hikers get lost on familiar trails, campers wander off course during short walks, and even trained outdoorsmen find themselves disoriented after fog rolls in or a storm rearranges familiar landmarks. You can have the best pack, the best knife, and the best intentions, but if you lose your sense of direction, everything else becomes damage control. This WWII navigation method cuts straight through that chaos. It's simple enough to use after an injury, flexible enough to work in almost any climate, and dependable enough that it's still taught in survival schools worldwide. With that in mind, let's get into the technique itself. During the Second World War, soldiers really had to rely on the direction of shadows, especially when all their gear was lost. It was, a simple but vital way to get their bearings in the field. Back then, patrols would sometimes scatter, units could get caught behind enemy lines, or, equipment might be lost in the chaos of a hurried retreat. When soldiers couldn't rely on their compasses, they were taught the shadow stick method. It's actually a centuries-old trick, but it became a proper part of wartime survival manuals. The idea behind it is quite straightforward, really. Use the movement of the sun to figure out true east and west. Even under stress, cold, or fatigue, this trick anchored soldiers to the terrain. To use the method, a soldier would plant a straight stick into the ground, just long enough to cast a sharp shadow. The tip of the shadow would be marked with a stone or boot heel. After waiting 10 to 15 minutes, he'd mark the new shadow tip. The first mark indicates west, and the second indicates east, because the shadow shrinks and moves as the sun appears to travel across the sky. Draw a line between those points, and you now have a reliable east-west line. Stand with west on your left and east on your right, and you're facing true north. One of the strengths of this method is that it works even when the terrain is totally unfamiliar. In dense forests, where every direction looks the same, or empty plains where the landscape repeats itself endlessly, this sun and shadow trick gave soldiers a tether to reality. A clever wartime refinement made the method even faster. World War II instructors quickly found that soldiers didn't always have the luxury to sit still. Patrols under threat needed a way to estimate direction on the move. As a result, field manuals began teaching a shortened version of the same principle. Instead of using a stick, a soldier could track the movement of his own shadow. In the morning, his shadow stretches long toward the west. By midday, it shrinks directly under him. In the late afternoon, it reaches out toward the east. This wasn't perfect, of course. Cloud cover, uneven ground, or thick forest can blur the shadow. But the trick became a mental calibration tool, something a soldier could check instinctively, almost unconsciously, while marching. Modern hikers can actually use the same idea whenever they need quick orientation without stopping. It's a simple trick that, honestly, can make a big difference out there. If you're traveling for several hours, just noticing how your shadow wanders is enough to keep you aligned with your intended direction. It's surprisingly effective, you know. You can apply this method today in several practical and reliable ways. It's a handy little skill to have, really. For example, hikers in open country can, recreate the full stick and shadow method almost anywhere. Even in winter, a trekking pole or just a broken branch works fine. In a survival situation where you need to reach a water source, follow a valley, or stay on course after your map gets soaked, this low-tech method really becomes priceless. A second application works well during long hikes. Check your shadow at regular intervals. If you're trying to travel steadily north, then in the morning your shadow should be generally ahead of you, and after midday it should drift behind. If you notice it swinging too far left or right, you know you've drifted off course. A third version helps in forests where sunlight is limited. If you only get short flashes of sunlight through gaps in the canopy, you can still mark shadow movement using a trunk or stump instead of a stick. Mark the shadow of a branch on the ground with debris, wait several minutes, and mark it again. Even a small shift is enough to reveal east and west. None of this requires tools, gear, or complicated math. It just requires paying attention, the same way World War II soldiers did when their survival depended on it. With all our modern conveniences, it's easy to assume orientation skills are outdated. But, GPS batteries die, phones overheat, cloud cover interferes with signals. A storm can knock out satellites for an hour. When your situation becomes unpredictable, your most dependable navigation tool becomes the environment itself. This World War II compass trick teaches more than just direction. It teaches awareness. It forces you to slow down, observe, and read the sky the way earlier generations did. Once you know how to use sun and shadow, the world stops feeling like an endless maze and starts feeling like a map you can read anywhere. If you enjoyed this guide and want more deep dives into forgotten skills, historical survival methods, and practical backwoods wisdom, make sure you subscribe to Backyard Wisdom and share this video with fellow enthusiasts who appreciate real, proven fieldcraft.